And it was such a demoralizing moment. And I was sort of trying to prepare myself for the inevitable and trying to think of what I was going to do next. And as I'm sort of going through this dark moment, my phone rings. And it's a partner, a very senior partner from the New York office of Salomon Brothers, and he said to me, I hear you're on the verge of losing your job, but you might have something interesting to say about Russia. Can you come to New York and tell me about it? And this guy, his job was to invest the firm's capital in strange situations around the world, and somehow had heard about me through the grapevine. And so I had jumped on a plane 2 days later after staying up 2 nights in a row putting together a PowerPoint presentation to try to save my idea, save my career, and try to salvage this situation. And I get to New York, and I'm a bit tired having stayed up 2 nights in a row, and I hadn't really paced myself. And so I go into this meeting, and I start taking this guy through my PowerPoint presentation, slide by slide. And he's not doing any nodding or ahhing or any of that kind of stuff that you do in a normal meeting. He had no sort of social interaction with me. He was just listening sort of absolutely dispassionately. And I was a bit tired, and I wasn't sure how I was doing, and he wasn't giving me any feedback. And I was starting to get a little concerned, and I got really concerned when up in the middle of the meeting, sort of halfway through the presentation, he just left the room. Without telling me where he was going, he just up and left. And I thought, oh my God, this is just a disaster. And I thought, God, shouldn't have stayed up so late. I should have really prepared myself better. I should have rehearsed this better. I need to figure out when he comes back, there must be a way of making this better. And I was rehearsing in my head what I was going to say when he came back. And I'm coming up with all the different plans, and I'm getting more and more nervous, and I'm not sure which one's going to work. And about half an hour later, he comes back into the room, and I'm about to blurt out some nonsense to get the meeting back on track. But before I have a chance to say anything, he says to me, Bill, what you showed me is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my investment life. He said, I've just gone to the risk committee of Salomon Brothers, and I've got $25 million for you to invest in this stuff. I want you to stop doing everything else you're doing and go and invest in Russia. And so that was the moment that was the moment that changed my life forever. When we went and invested the money, I went basically and sat in a hotel room in Moscow and organized purchases of vouchers and delivery of vouchers to the vault, and then delivery of vouchers from the vault to the voucher auctions, and we eventually got the money invested. And then about 5 months later, The Economist magazine wrote an article called, 7 months later, The Economist wrote an article called Sale of the Century, in which they described the math that I just took you through. And as a result of that, a few people then sort of stepped into the market to try to buy Russian stocks. And all it took was a few people stepping into the market, and our $25 million portfolio turned into a $125 million portfolio 7 months later. And this was back in the days when $100 million was real money. And all of a sudden, I was like the hero on the trading floor of Salomon Brothers. All the guys who had been not inviting me to lunch were waiting at my desk when I arrived in the morning to get advice on how to get their money invested in the stock market. And then something very helpful happened for me, which was the salespeople from Salomon who covered the most important clients of the firm started approaching me one by one, having heard about this special situation that I had been in. And they wanted to start introducing me to their important clients. And so I'd get these invitations. Bill, can you come and meet George Soros? He'd like to hear what you've got to say about Russia. No, I'm not going to come and meet George. Of course I'll meet George Soros. Bill, will you meet Sir John Templeton? He really, when he heard your story, he wanted to meet you. So pretty soon I went on this world tour of meeting famous people from Wall Street. And who was I to say no? I was 29 years old. I had the best opportunity, this unbelievable opportunity to meet the people who made the whole thing work. And I go to these meetings, and these guys were not in any way stupid like the original Salomon Brothers people. When they heard what I had to say, they immediately jumped onto it and they said, Bill, this is amazing. This is truly extraordinary. Can we give you some money to manage? And I said, well, I'm not sure. We don't do that for other people. Let me go and see if I can convince the bosses that we can. So I go back and ask the bosses, can we manage money for George Soros or Michael Steinhardt or Julian Robertson? And this time they weren't so bad as they were the first time. They said, wow, for sure, yes, definitely. let's form a task force and study it. So I go to my first task force meeting, and there are 40 people there who I've never seen before in my life, who all start arguing with each other about who is going to get the economic credit for this business. And they were all senior directors and managing directors and senior managing directors and executive chairmen and non-executive chairmen, and all these people all getting greedy over this non-existent business that I was about to do. And the one thing I knew for sure when this argument broke out, the one person for sure who wasn't going to get any economic credit for the business was me. And so I did something which everybody thought was crazy at the time, which was I got very emotional. I up and quit. And I went and set up my own business called Hermitage Capital Management. And I was working here in London. I went to my apartment in Hampstead and typed up a prospectus and then went on a big road trip to try to raise money from all these famous guys that I met. And during the road trip, I get to Edmund Safra. And I'm sure a lot of you know who Edmund Safra was. And Edmund Safra said, listen, Bill, instead of just being an investor, why don't we become business partners? He said, I'll put up the first 25 million. And if you do well, I'll introduce you to like all the rich people in the world, and I know all of them. I thought, that sounds interesting. Let me think about it. So I go back, and I didn't actually know that much about Edmund Safra at the time. He was just one of the many people I'd been sort of meeting. And so I started making some phone calls to ask about Edmund Safra. And the first call I make is to a friend of mine, and he said, Edmund Safra wants to do business with you? Are you kidding? Edmund Safra doesn't do joint ventures with anybody. He said, does he know who you are? I think so. And he said, I would jump at that thing so quick before he figures out who you really are. His name is like gold. I had 2 more conversations almost exactly like that. And I quickly went back to Safra and said, yes, of course, let's sign the papers immediately. We signed the papers. I moved out to Moscow with $25 million of just money from Safra. In 1996, I got a small serviced office, got a picnic table, some picnic chairs, got a computer, actually 2 computers, hired a driver, a secretary, and a trader, and started investing. And at the time that I was investing, I was the only Wall Street educated investor sitting on the ground in Moscow. At this point, there were Wall Street educated investors sitting on the ground in Wall Street who were investing in Russia. And there were Wall Street educated stockbrokers sitting on the ground in Russia. But no Wall Street educated investors sitting on the ground in Russia. And so if you wanted to invest and you were doing it from New York, you had to rely on brokers. You couldn't do your own research. So the brokers would write these research reports, and if you were living in New York, you'd read the research report and say, I'll take some of that, I won't take some of that, and I'll buy some of this. What happened was the companies that they wrote research reports traded at 10 times the price of companies that they didn't write research reports on because nobody wanted to buy shares of companies that weren't being researched. But I wasn't constrained by this New York thing. And so I could go and visit the oil company that traded at 1/10 the valuation of Lukoil, called Sibneft, that didn't have any research report on it. And I realized that Sibneft was they just had as unpleasant a group of management. They had just as much rusting oil derricks. They had the same exact situation as Lukoil, just at 1/10 the price per barrel of reserves. So I figured, well, why should I be the sucker buying the tourist stocks? I'm going to buy this local stuff. And I loaded up my portfolio with all these things that weren't researched. And then I helped the process along a little bit for myself, which was I wrote up little pieces of research and sent them around to all those famous guys I met on Wall Street. And my fund went up 175% in my first year. I went from 25 million to 150 million of assets under management. In 1997, which was my second year, my fund went up 228% from the start of the year to the end of the year. It was the best performing fund in the world in 1997. I was up 800% from April 1996 until the end of 1997. I was managing more than $1 billion. It had become so popular that my clients would send their private jets to invite me to their yachts. I was being featured on the front page of the New York Times and the Business Week and Financial Times. And I was 33 years old. Now, for those of you who are in the business of finance, you know that one of those things I just described to you would be a great success. But all of those things together is the largest sell signal you'll ever see any situation. A 33-year-old managing $1 billion in a small market like Russia, up 800%, going to his clients' yachts on the front page of the business section of the New York Times, forget it. And sure enough, it was the biggest sell signal there ever was. But I wasn't old enough to appreciate that.